The Albigensian Crusade, a bloodbath in Languedoc. Welcome back to my 3 Histories channel. By the year 1209, the southern French region of Languedoc was already waist-deep in blood. It had been spilling since 1208 when Pope Innocent III launched a crusade against the Cathars, an ancient Christian sect living here who had strayed from the teachings of the Roman Church. And as we've learned, religion can be a violent business. In our previous episode, we witnessed how these fanatical preachers whipped up the local population into a frenzy of violence, massacring thousands of Cathars and burning their villages to the ground. But now the Crusaders were coming for the Cathar leadership, and only one city could stop them, the impregnable fortress of Béziers. This is Uncovering History. Today we are returning to Languedoc in 1209 to uncover the dark truth behind the massacre of Béziers. On June 22, 1209, the crusading army led by Simon de Montfort approached the city gates. With them came 4 men whose presence sent a chill down the spine of every defender. They were the 4 evangelists preaching the word of Christ. At least that's what they like to call themselves. In reality, they were God's punishment sent to rid the world of heresy. The first was Dominic de Guzman, the man responsible for whipping up the crusade in the first place. His fiery sermons calling for the extermination of the Cathars still echoed in the minds of those assembled outside the walls of Béziers. Then there was Arnaud Amalric, Bishop of Reims, and a former papal legate who had already proven his zeal by presiding over the sack of a village just weeks earlier. Leading the charge was the ruthless Simon de Montfort, the siege master whose very presence struck fear into the hearts of besieged populations. And finally, there was the abbot of Citeaux, a stern disciplinarian and leader of the monastic order that had provided the backbone of the crusading force. These 4 men would lead the assault on Béziers, a city considered the spiritual heart of the Cathar movement. And standing before them stood one of the largest and most imposing fortresses in all of Europe. Its thick stone walls rose 30 feet above the ground, protecting the city of Béziers and its 60,000 inhabitants. In the top left corner of the screen, we see a modern reconstruction of the city walls. As the Crusaders approach, we see the city's equally imposingly high watchtowers, each manned by an elite guard of Cathar soldiers. On the other side of the wall stood the Crusaders. The largest group within this army was made up of French nobles and knights from Aquitaine and northern France. Next to them stood troops from the county of Toulouse, loyalist forces sent by the young countess to defend her lands from the invaders. Also present were contingents from England and even the Holy Roman Empire. Between them were tents housing Dominican friars and fanatical preachers. And bringing up the rear was the common foot soldiers, peasants armed with pitchforks and clubs. All of them looked up at the fortress before them and waited for the signal to attack. And so it began, the longest and bloodiest siege in medieval history. For 8 months, the Crusaders camped around the city, launching constant assaults on its walls. Yet time and time again, they were beaten back by the defenders. In the top right corner of your screen, we see a modern reconstruction of the siege. Notice how the Crusaders come in strong at first, but slowly become worn out by the defenders' archery skills and sheer tenacity. As the weeks passed, the Crusaders became more desperate. Supplies dwindled, and hunger forced them to abandon their siege engines. Even worse, the fortress seemed impervious to attack. Their only hope was to starve the inhabitants into submission, so the crusading leaders assembled and declared a strict blockade. No food or water was allowed into the city. Farmers surrounding Béziers were ordered to abandon their crops and livestock and move away from the city. The fields around Béziers were then plowed under so that nothing could grow there ever again. This scorched earth policy aimed to break the will of the inhabitants. But to this day, no one knows how the people of Béziers endured. In the top left corner of your screen, we see a modern recreation of life inside the city during the siege. The people of Béziers had to resort to eating rats and dogs, Others resorted to cannibalism, selling their own children into slavery to ensure their own survival. Those too young or too weak to be sold watched as the bodies of their kin piled up in the streets and their cries for mercy went unanswered. After 8 long months, the inhabitants of Béziers were skeletons of their former selves. Still, they refused to surrender. It would take another 5 weeks to break their resistance. On July 22nd, the citizens saw the smoke rising from the nearby fields. They knew what this meant and watched in horror as the Crusaders rode towards the city gates. That night, the Crusaders set fire to the dry grass surrounding the city. A strong wind fanned the flames, turning the entire countryside into a fiery inferno. When the inhabitants opened their doors to flee the fire, they found themselves trapped. The Crusaders had laid siege to the city. Once again, the people of Béziers found themselves surrounded by enemies and nowhere to run. What followed has become known throughout history as one of the worst massacres of the medieval period. As the crusading army entered the city, they found a people broken beyond repair. Men, women, and children fell to their knees begging for mercy, but received none. The Crusaders had come to Béziers to kill everyone, and everyone meant everyone. Inside the city, the killings went on for 3 days. Seeing no difference between the innocent and the guilty, the Crusaders murdered 60,000 Catholics, including priests, monks, and nuns. To make matters worse, despite having lost their siege engines and most of their provisions, the Crusaders were now flush with supplies thanks to the pillaging of a nearby village. Having rested and resupplied themselves, they set their sights on Carcassonne. There, 40,000 more Cathars awaited them. Once again, the Crusaders faced seemingly insurmountable odds. Carcassonne's massive double walls rose 40 feet high and were protected by multiple towers, 40,000 well-armed defenders, and an inner moat filled with spikes designed to destroy any siege engine that crossed it. But by this point, nothing could stop the bloodthirsty Crusaders. Only a handful escaped through a secret tunnel dug under the city walls. From there, the Crusaders fanned out across southern France, destroying every Cathar stronghold. By 1229, they had exterminated nearly every Cathar in existence. Only a handful of communities managed to escape persecution, such as the one here in the village of Rennes-le-Château, where they hid for centuries before emerging into the modern world. But why? Why did the Catholic Church feel such hatred towards the Cathars? After all, both groups worshipped the same God. To understand the origins of the Albigensian Crusade, we must travel back to the 2nd century AD and the rise of Manichaeism. Founded by the Persian prophet Mani, this new religion combined elements of Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism, and taught that the material world was evil and destined to be destroyed. Its followers, called the Cathari, believed that the only way to salvation was to escape this wicked world and seek refuge in the spirit world. Over the next 400 years, Cathar missionaries spread this message across Europe, converting thousands of pagans and Christians alike. However, by the 12th century, the Catholic Church had grown concerned by the rapid growth of Catharism. They accused Cathars of heresy, claiming that their beliefs ran counter to the teachings of Christ. But to the Cathars, this was far from the truth. In fact, Catharism actually predated the official canon of the New Testament. Many scholars today consider Catharism to be one of the earliest forms of Christianity. Still, the Catholic Church felt threatened and sought to destroy the Cathars once and for all. In 1167, Pope Alexander III established the Order of the Knights Templar to root out heresy in southern France. But despite their best efforts, the Templars failed to stop the spread of Catharism. Instead, they turned to fanatical preachers like Dominic de Guzman to whip up popular support against the Cathars. Dominic had discovered a powerful weapon in stirring people's emotions. He traveled across France, preaching that God himself had sent him to punish the Cathars. Soon, hundreds of thousands of people answered his call, joining him in the crusade against the heretics. But as we've seen, it soon became clear that popular support alone was not enough to defeat the Cathars. The help of military force was needed. And so, in 1208, Pope Innocent III called for a crusade against the Cathars. Thus began the Albigensian Crusade, a brutal campaign to exterminate the Cathars and eradicate heresy from the south of France forever. The crusade lasted for nearly 2 decades and resulted in the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people. Only when the fortress of Montségur fell in 1244 did the Catholic Church finally feel secure in its victory. Today, the legacy of the Albigenses lives on in southern France. Many scholars believe that the region's distinctive culture and language are the result of the Cathars' influence, and some have even claimed that the Cathars survived the massacre of Béziers and lived on in secret until today. However, there is little evidence to support these claims. What is clear is that the massacre of Béziers stands as one of the darkest moments in medieval history. In the name of God, and in pursuit of religious purity, the Crusaders murdered tens of thousands of innocent people. It was a tragedy that shocked the conscience of Europe and one that should never be forgotten. Now check out these videos for more on the Cathars.